Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 Episode 5 was a cinematic spectacle in every sense of the word. Be it the direction, the animation, or everything in between, it was a tremendously impressive and stylish work of art that steamrolled past the many limitations associated with TV anime, or in other words, it was your typical Jujutsu Kaisen. This episode, much like the rest, was insanely creative. It was filled with interesting, eye-catching shots and visual ideas, incredibly strong 2D animation and top-notch drawings. Basically, it was the team refusing to go down the standard route, refusing to be normal for lack of a better term. If you expect your anime adaptations to simply recreate manga panels and call it a day, I'm afraid this is not the show for you. This is something more, something unique. Like it or not, that's just the way things are. Anyway, with all that being said, let's go through this aforementioned insanely creative episode and break down the visuals. Make sure to subscribe. I've made a ton of Jujutsu Kaisen videos in the past and I'll continue to do so in the future, so if that sounds interesting to you, you know what to do, just go down there and subscribe. You can also become a member of this channel. Members get at least 2 exclusive videos per month, custom badges and emojis, shoutouts and more. Just go down there and press the join button. As always, let's start with the staff list. This episode was directed by Masaomi Ando, a fairly experienced director with several series direction gigs under his belt, and storyboarded once again by series director Shota Goshizono, which means yes, Goshizono has personally storyboarded every single thing for JJK Season 3, all 5 episodes, the OP and the ED. Now, setting aside the sheer absurdity of the quantity of his output, him personally handling all of the storyboards has allowed Season 3 to stay as true to his original vision as possible. After all, when it comes to reinforcing your creative vision, it doesn't get much better than visually crafting every single shot yourself from the ground up, does it? A near solo storyboarding effort is pretty much the final boss of hands-on direction. Anyway, to the surprise of absolutely no one, this episode was really well directed and storyboarded. The shots were unorthodox and creative, the composition sense on display throughout the entire thing was unbelievably high level, the sense of visual flow and rhythm was off the charts, blah blah blah. It's a Shota Goshizono episode, come on, you know what those are like. Over on the animation front, this episode featured 2 chief animation directors, Yosuke Yajima and Mitsue Mori, 5 animation directors, 2 assistant animation directors, a small list of key animators consisting of just 8 people, and a whopping 57-second key animators on cleanup duty, which... Look, I don't want to waste time talking about the nuances of second key animator counts and what they tell us about production conditions, but very briefly, yes, an episode with a lot of movement having a large cleanup crew isn't particularly concerning, but at the same time, it's not exactly ideal either. I saw folks on Twitter gaslighting themselves into believing second key animator counts don't matter anymore just because certain high-profile productions like JJK have seemingly turned animators cleaning up their own layouts into a foreign concept, but let me tell you, in no uncertain terms, they do matter. It's just that there's more to it than small number good, big number bad. Anyway, that's enough yapping for now. Let's finally go through this episode scene by scene. The episode opened up with those classic, dynamic, eye-catching compositions that Goshizono is known for. The actual amount of animation, aka movement, wasn't all that high throughout this section, but the incredible storyboarding more than made up for that. Here are a few examples. In this opening shot, these dangly things at the top of the screen are actually a separate background layer that moves differently, giving the shot an added sense of 3-dimensionality. Similarly, this shot was mostly static, but between the interesting composition and the slight bit of shadow animation on the ground, it didn't feel like it, if that makes sense. This shot was a still, but the incredible drawing quality complete with the amazing line placement and shadow and highlight usage made things interesting. The use of the glass wall with those holes in these shots added an extra layer of visual information. The 3-layered background pan in this shot looked grand and eye-catching. The extreme high-angle shot here was a lot of fun. Basically, Goshizono and team were able to linger on either static or nearly static shots for extended periods of time without boring the audience thanks to the fantastic framing and the incredible drawings. Like, you know you're doing something right when you can linger on a practically still shot of a sink for 10 seconds straight. Of course, things weren't entirely static. It is Jujutsu Kaisen. At the end of the day, there was plenty of movement. This shot, for example, I love how heavy the body language felt. You could see her outfit and hair interact with and move with respect to her body and the ground. So good. Speaking of body language, really cool shot of Yaga taking off his jacket hair with very natural looking acting. It's a shortcut, but it's very eye-catching. Also some dynamic warped framing here. Like I said, every shot was visually interesting. I loved this section. The flickering lights accompanied by the shading layer appearing and disappearing, turning the character drawing from regular to Zenkage and back was so ominous, such a fun idea. This shot was cool with a completely grayed out background, these blurred leaves with thick smeary outlines, these outlineless drawings of panda's feet and these occasional light bubbles. This was then followed by these really complex drawings. The perspective on Yaga's face here is really unorthodox, with his jaw being behind his nose, pointing backwards, and it was conveyed perfectly. We then got some really impressive character acting animation centered around Panda, which, like I said, was really impressive. Here's the thing, making regular humans look expressive is difficult enough, but at least there's precedent for that. It has been done before. How the f does one go about making a fucking panda look expressive? How does one find reference material for something like that? You get my point, right? Unorthodox anatomies are particularly tricky to animate. Kinda random, but I loved how the superimposed clips from episode 3 on top of new footage here instead of simply cutting to it. It seems like Goshizono shares my dislike of standard flashback presentation. Also some subtle but fairly solid movement underneath, so there's that. Really impressive, lifelike fabric animation here. The geometric shadows represent the folds and the accompanying motion was amazing, particularly fond of how you could feel the force of Yuji tugging his jacket to get his head through. Small motions like those are incredibly difficult to animate properly, so props to whoever was in charge of this scene. As I've mentioned a million times by this point, Goshizono's storyboards are always spacious even in areas you don't expect them to be. This pole barrier thing, for example, while the rest of the background is a static illustration, this one part of it is actually drawn by the animator, and when Yuji lifts it, you can see it swing past the camera and away from it and return with a satisfying bounce. Again, three-dimensionality is Goshizono's bread and butter. The walking animation here was slightly stiff, but besides that, this entire section was really cool even when there wasn't much happening animation-wise. Be it this shot with the two sets of signs dividing the screen into two halves and Yuji and Fushiguro walking past them all while having different distances from the camera, be it these solid, aesthetically pleasing Zenkage drawings. Again, every shot had something unique to offer. And speaking of something unique, the partial background animation here was quite interesting. The railing was a combination of static background illustrations and background animation. This section was actually animated while this section was static, and this effect gave this shot an added sense of volume and directional motion. Such a fun idea. Really impressive bit of volume and perspective control here. Love how you can tell that the front of Yuji's shoes are closer to the camera, followed by some really cool unorthodox compositions backed up by solid 2D animation. The use of reflections in this shot, the meticulously drawn stair descending animation, the bouncy walk cycles with more than average number of drawings, the lively expressions, the acting complete with top-notch drawings. This episode wasn't as overtly animation heavy as some of the major episodes from this series, but it definitely didn't lack movement, absolutely not. Really loved the compositions and the compositing around this section, the way they utilized the broken walls and roofs to create interesting shots, and the way they integrated these god rays, which I believe were a combination of digital and hand-drawn effects. It was amazing. I remember Gojo vs Toji from season 2 having a similar vibe compositing wise, but the execution here was vastly superior in my opinion. The lighting felt a lot more organic. A decent set of drawings and acting and a ton of hand-drawn food and cans then brought us to one of the two animation highlights of this episode, that being Yuji vs Panda, and I loved it. The entire fight was very unserious in nature and the visuals reflected that. We had goofy, fun expressions, comical speech bubbles, comedic shots, and everything in between. It was uncharacteristically wholesome, if you know what I mean. The fight started with some relatively grounded action and the occasional goofy body language, and once again Goshizono used a lot of quick cuts. I guess he just likes to do that. And once again it worked. To quote myself from a few weeks back, the flow was flowing. Also love those little jumps. We then got to Yuto's sequence and it was pure uncontrolled Kanada goodness. We started with this shot with the extreme foreshortening on Yuji's leg and the snappy timing, followed by some of those classic blocky effect shapes and these fun idiosyncratic mob drawings, particularly fond of the low angle perspective here. We then got this money shot, the background went full speed lines and the character shapes and drawings were extremely energetic and fun to look at, complete with some really exaggerated, almost comical levels of foreshortening and Yuto's signature easily recognizable effects animation. This shot was quite cool. The characters were static besides Yuji's hair, but the high energy flickering wind effects and the background pan/camera shake made the motion feel heavy. This was then followed by this shot, which too was a still frame, but it was so much fun. The warped, energetic character arcs, the sharp shapes and outlines, the effects, so good. The sequence finally concluded with these shots with those classic Kannada poses, timing and effects, and a fantastic understanding of space and distance. The perspective work on Yuji and Panda as they closed in towards the camera was outstanding. The fight, however, was far from over. We then got what is presumed to be O'Brien Benny's work, and in terms of animation philosophies, it was an exact 180. While Yuto's sequence relied on snappy, exaggerated, somewhat frame-conservative shots, Benny's sequence was more smooth and flowy with tons of frames being assigned to each motion. Basically, two very different approaches to action animation right next to one another, but thankfully neither felt out of place. I loved how real the movement here felt. Each action had a lot of personality and tons of additional small motions besides the main action. Also, like I said, the frame count throughout the sequence was quite high. This cut, for example, the build up to the punch had tons of drawings of Yuji's head going back and forth, followed by the actual action. This shot was really funny. They conveyed Yuji doing a complete rotation in the air, not just via these semicircular speed lines, but also by animating the shadows on his face and the light bubbles on his eyes. Really cool stuff. The fight finally ended with some exaggerated over-the-top acting on Panda, also presumed to be the work of Benny, and I've already explained why that's particularly impressive. Fantastic stuff. Some unique compositions and loose, blocky, fun character acting animation on Yuji courtesy of Toshiyuki Sato then brought us to the second animation highlight of this episode. This shot, and good fucking god was it absurd. This entire 3 minute and 40-second section with constant, ambitious character acting animation was one cut, just one. And I mean this in the most respectful way possible, but you need to be slightly not alright in the head to attempt a shot like this. As confirmed by the episode director, this scene was rotoscoped, although they did a fantastic job of making the movement feel natural and avoiding that uncanny feeling rotoscoped scenes tend to have. Also, fun fact, the rotoscope models/actors for this section were episode director Masaomi Ando and storyboard artist Shota Goshizono. Ando played Hakari and Goshizono played Yuji because, and these are Ando's words, not mine, Ando is fat and Goshizono is skinny. Here's the thing, did they need to go so hard? Not really. Did the directors themselves have to act out the actions? Not exactly, but they did so anyway because they are creative people and that's what creative people do, they do cool shit. Ambition is an increasingly rare commodity in TV anime, so I recommend savoring moments like these. Anyway, more about the animation. The movement here was extremely lifelike and heavy, which is to be expected from animation drawn over real-life action. Although I highly doubt Goshizono and Ando actually fought each other near the end, that part probably isn't rotoscoped. Regardless, the sheer number of drawings in this section was outlandish. The movement never stopped, it was ridiculous. Were the drawings strictly consistent? Not quite. The scene did melt a fair bit, but inconsistency like that isn't caused by a lack of time, rather it's a byproduct of ambition. I'm sure the scene would have looked perfectly consistent if they animated it normally. I don't know if casual fans will notice and appreciate a scene like this, but as someone who is hyper-obsessed with the art form, I can't help but be blown away by the sheer amount of effort that went into a shot like this. Like I said, you just don't see stuff like this in TV anime, even the high-profile ones. Absolutely incredible. And that was the episode. Incredibly cinematic, incredibly fun, incredibly well put together, the whole 9 yards. Goshizono's Jujutsu Kaisen continues to be one of the most visually interesting things ever, and I can't wait to see more of it. That's about it. A special thanks to Nude03, Amir, the Gallus90 and Shiki-san for becoming tier 3 members, and until next time.